Once upon a time, there was a little frog family that lived next to a little puddle in the mud, and they had been in that area for generations without going outside, venturing out of their little circle. So one day, an adventurous little frog went out into the wide world and left behind his family, wandering out into the jungle. He hopped along happily, what seemed like a long time for a little frog, and suddenly he heard a rumbling sound, like a crashing of a huge creature through the jungle, and he cowered in fear, and he saw this huge creature lumbering past, rumbling through the jungle, a little ways away from him. This is what we know as an elephant. For this little frog, you just saw him as some huge colossus, some giant. So he hopped on back to his home quickly and went straight back to his mother, and he said, "Oh, mother, I saw this huge creature." She was saying, "Why did you leave? Why did you go?" He said, "Mother, what can I do? I was curious." But he said, "Look, I found this huge creature. It was like hundreds, thousands of times bigger than us." That the frog mother, and she had never left her little puddle in the mud, and she had never seen such a creature like an elephant. Hearing about this, she was a little skeptical, and she thought, my son must be exaggerating. She puffed herself up and asked the son, was it this big? No, much bigger. So then she puffed herself even more. Was it this big? No, much bigger. Hundreds of times bigger than that. She was a little bit annoyed with her son, who does he think he's saying something is so much bigger than me? He's minimizing me. She puffed herself up bigger and bigger and bigger, and he kept saying, "No, much bigger. It was much bigger than that. You're not even close." So she puffed herself up so much, finally, pop, she exploded. And you can imagine the scene. To the horror of the little frog, his mother lay in 100 remains. So does this macabre story have a moral? Of course. This story was told by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Prabhupada in his book called Upakhyane Upadesa, Instructive Stories. Srila Prabhupada explains that there is a class of so-called spiritualists who consider themselves to be equal to God. With this kind of puffed up mentality, they only lead to their own downfall. People say that now, because of illusion, we think that we are some small little jiva, living entity, but when we become enlightened, then we'll realize that, oh, I am that self-same God. I am God, just an illusion. Such persons certainly fall down. Ye anye aravindaksha vimuktamanyas tvesta bhavat avishuddha buddhya aruya krichena param padam patanti ronadipta yushmad angrayaha. The scriptures state that because people who think themselves to be so great, so high up, like the Supreme Being themselves, they may rise up to a high position, but again they will certainly fall down because they have failed to develop a direct, loving connection, yoga, union, through a blissful ras of relationship with Krishna. Because they haven't done this, then they think they are the Krishnas, then they try to get others to worship them, and then they exploit others, and they end up falling down from their position because of their pride. So this is the idea of the puffed up frog, trying to puff themselves up to be as great as God. Or there are others who equate themselves with liberated souls, or like prophets and messiahs, Jagat Gurus, teachers of the whole world, spiritual gurus, masters of the whole world. And they think, oh, maybe now I'm just like 2 fingers short, but if I study a bit harder, if I become a better preacher, or I will not be any less than a Jagat Guru, some great savior. I can become like a Jagat Guru. If we try to become the Father, then we will fall down. We should try to be the Son, the servant. In time we can be a father ourselves, but we cannot become our Father. The living entity is a small particle of consciousness, like a photon or a particle of light coming from the sun. Krishna is like the sun of divine consciousness, and we are just a spark. That spark can never become the sun entire, nor can it merge. It maintains its own individual small position. We can never become that omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent being. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 24, there's a pastime where someone was calling Mahaprabhu, who was a sannyasi, like the Supreme Lord, Bhagavan. People do this with sannyasis generally. Like Mayavadi sannyasis, they were called like Narayan. Even like poor people and beggars, the Mayavadi said, they're just poor Narayan, poor gods. Even though Mahaprabhu was or is God, he came in the role of a devotee. So he closed his ears and said, no, Vishnu, Vishnu, Vishnu. How can I be the Lord? I am just such a small little devotee, small little jiva. The jiva can never become one with Krishna. This is a great offense to think that even. The living entity is a small part of the whole Sri Krishna. We are part and parcel of Krishna. But we cannot be Sri Krishna himself. That is a very wrong and offensive mentality. Krishna will always be the whole, we will always be the small part. Srila Prabhupada also taught that it is important for the devotee to remain humble and not consider himself to be such a great devotee or a great Vaishnava or a great learned scholar or a big guru. We should just try to develop the mood of humility. We may be respected and regarded by others, we may preach so nicely, but internally we must keep this simple mood and humble mood. It is said in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, the tree with many fruits bows down. It is very humble. When we have so many good qualities which are like fruits, then we will bow down and we will use them only to serve others. Just like the tree gives its fruits for the service of others, gives its bark, its wood, its shade for the service of others. If we want to be perfected in spiritual life, we must follow the teachings of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He taught the importance of humility many times. Especially in his famous verse, Trinadapi Sunichena Torori Vasahishana Manina Manidina Kirtaniya Sarahari. Just go. One should consider himself lower and more destitute than a piece of straw in the street. And in this way, we want to be humbler than a blade of grass, more tolerant than a tree, giving respect to all others without desiring respect for ourselves. And in this state, we can always chant the glories of Sri Hari. So thank you for your time. Hare Krishna.